This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I had the absolute pleasure of chatting with concert violinist, educator and creator Gwendolyn Masin. She's the fourth generation of a family of musicians. She started playing piano at the age of 3. She started playing violin at the age of 5. And she performed in her first concert in front of a big audience at just the age of 6. Gwendolyn has lived all over the world. She works tirelessly 7 days a week. And to survive at this level, she must work just as hard on her fitness as she does on her craft. Not only did I learn about the amount of pain that musicians such as Gwendolyn have to endure, I also learned that she is much a talented creator and entrepreneur as she is a musician. Let's hear from Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn Masin, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm very well today, thank you.
What part of the world are you sitting in?
I am in Switzerland, in Bern, the capital city.
Is that where you live?
That is where I live now. It's not always where I've lived, but that's where I live now. And this is the home base from which I travel to do work.
How long have you been living there?
That's a long story. I came here originally to study for my third level degree studies and moved away for a number of years after I'd completed the first sort of step of that. So following what would be considered a bachelor's, I moved away from Bern. I moved to Zurich actually. And following studies in Zurich, I went to Lübeck in Germany. And I spent a lot of time in Italy, Germany and Hungary in the ensuing years. And I came back to Switzerland when I was offered a position as a violin professor in the Geneva University Department of Music. And that's when I made my way back to Bern. So that would be 2012.
You're talking to the boy from Cork who emigrated to Dublin for 3 years at one point in time in his career and returned to Cork. So I think you've done a little bit more traveling than what I have. You're a concert violinist, an educator, and a founder and artistic director of the GAIA Festival in Switzerland. Have I got all of that right?
It's the Gaia Music Festival. It's a name, Gaia.
The Gaia. Oh, that's actually a name. Is that initials that stand for something?
Yes, that's the first Greek female, well, it's the first Greek goddess. In fact, the first Greek goddess to ensue out of chaos, and she represents the earth, Mother Earth.
Ah, I was fairly sure they were the initials for some official organization or something with the way things go. Where did you grow up?
So I'm just warning listeners that all the questions that sound so simple to answer are not simple. And then the really hard questions that for some listeners might seem like the earth-shattering ones are really easy for me to answer. So I apologize if I get things upside down for some listeners. I was born in Holland, in Amsterdam, into a family of musicians. I'm a fourth generation musician from my mother's side. My mother's Hungarian. And my father, who is also a musician, is half Czech and half Dutch. Ah. And when I was 5 years old, we moved away from Holland, from Amsterdam to Cape Town in South Africa, which is a continent on which my father grew up as a child and teenager before he returned to Europe. We lived in Cape Town for 5 years and then made our way back to Europe, where via Hungary and Holland, we found our way to Dublin when I was 10 years old. And my parents continue to reside there. They feel very at home. They've embraced being in Ireland. They've been there over 30 years. And I left the Emerald Isle after my leaving cert to start my third level studies. So that's sort of my travel history there up until my 20s in a nutshell.
You're still wearing your green jumper, so I'm going to
This is it.
pretend that
The Irish
Ireland is your
spirit is
place.
there all the time.
Yeah. Where do you consider home when you think about it? Is there any place? I know Switzerland is your home now, but before that, where are you most connected to?
Those are two questions, if I hear you right. There's where is home and where are you connected to? And to me, they're two separate entities. So where is home? I've struggled to answer my whole life, and I will struggle through in this very muddled, fuzzy answer. Home is definitely where the people who I love are, which is not to say that if I'm visiting my family and it's in a very dank, musty, horrible room that I go, oh, this is home. But my sense of home is very much attached to people. And by extension, where I feel at home is also made what it is by the people or by a society, by a culture. So I identify as Irish. I have an Irish passport. I feel very at home in Dublin. That's also because I grew up there. I went to school there. I have friends there. I understand certain thought mechanisms and processes. And there's so many things about the people that I know in Ireland that I love. And there's a certain sense of understanding between people that comes very easily. And I think that part of the reason that I love to be around Irish people so much is because that sort of easy banter, that sort of sliding into, you're sitting in a pub and literally sliding into conversations between people you've never met, and they're just welcome you into that conversation, is something I've encountered a lot in the world of music, in which I spend a lot of time. And that then ends up being a very international thing. You could have that sort of easy conversation. Literally, I was standing yesterday at a train station in Basel and waiting for someone, waiting to meet someone to do work. And somebody shouted my name. And I turned around to see a viola player I know from Spain, who I haven't seen in 4 years. And we spoke as if we'd seen each other yesterday. And while we were standing there, she encountered someone she hadn't seen from Spain in 10 years. So there were three people who barely know each other from very different parts of the world, very different stories, who just slid into a conversation with the ease of knowing that they all have something in common. And in Ireland, I've always felt that no matter how big the differences and disagreements, essentially, at least in the Republic, there's this sense of, well, sure, you belong to a certain kind of thing. And that certain thing to me has a lot to do with that ease, that welcoming hospitality, that sort of generosity towards other people, that lack of suspicion, which you could find in other societies, at least in Europe, you'll find cultures that are more or less open towards other people. And so that's why I love being home. I've identified as Irish for most of my life, and I feel very at home there. That doesn't mean, however, that if I look at any old part in Ireland, I go, oh, this is where I'm at home. A lot of parts of Ireland are completely unknown to me, and I might know other countries far better and recognize them and still not ever feel quite at home. But the complete and full and honest and open truth is that if you travel as much as I have in my life and as much as I have to for work, you're never at home anywhere, but you're also never not at home anywhere.
Is that unsettling, all of that moving that you did, even at an early stage?
The fact of life in the meantime. It was unsettling when I was a teenager to me, because it was very hard to answer easy questions with a simple answer.
Yeah.
And it can alienate other people. You can also do the lazy version. I could also just go, I'm from Dublin. And then the whole thing is just settled. But eventually in conversation, someone from Dublin will pick up that I'm not living there right now, or that there's something I said that doesn't make sense to them because that's not what happened yesterday in the news, or whatever. They'll pick it up.
Did you spend a lot of time saying goodbye to good friends through no choice of your own and then having to do it again a few years later?
Yes and no. Sometimes it's not been of my free will. Obviously, as a child, you don't get much of a say in it. Although that's not entirely true either. Where we live in Dublin has a lot to do with the fact that I started a primary school, which I loved, and my parents decided that they would live close to that primary school, even though perhaps having lived in a different part of Dublin might have been nicer or more advantageous. And as an adult, the choices I make are my own. Doesn't, however, mean that you don't end up saying goodbye a lot. And that's the musician's lifestyle. I mean, that's what I do. The artist's lifestyle, if you're a performer, has a lot to do with saying hello and goodbye. And not just to people, but to ideas, to projects, to music, to art itself.
And you told me you're a fourth generation of musicians. So mum and dad, could you tell me about them?
My mom is a musician. She plays viola. That's her primary instrument. She also plays violin and piano. She's also got a very strong ability for theory, for composition analysis, all the very intellectually orientated cerebral sort of work that comes along with being a musician. My dad's a violinist. They met in Brussels, where they were both studying. They've been together since their very late teens, early 20s. And music sort of really is part of nearly every moment of our lives in our house. There's either somebody making it, somebody being taught it, somebody thinking about it, somebody not doing it and therefore catching everyone's attention because they're not doing anything with music. But our lives more or less circle around that as a main topic.
Because I suspect life might have been slightly different if dad was a plumber and your mum was a teacher.
Potentially.
Possibly. What were the conversations around the dinner table? And even more interestingly, who were some of the interesting guests?
We had a lot of amazing people in our house because my father was the concert master of what is now the Nederlands Philharmonisch Orkest, the Dutch Philharmonic Orchestra. And he spent 30 years in that function. So the concert master is kind of like the key person that translate whatever the conductor is trying to explain to the orchestra and hasn't been fully understood, maybe, and vice versa. The concert master is also responsible for the bowings in the string section, and is also somehow seen as an ambassador of the organization towards the outside. So
give me that again. So we have the conductor. On the last episode of the podcast, I had Vincent Kennedy. He's a conductor and a composer. And we were talking about Maestro, the film about Leonard Bernstein, and all of that. So he went to great lengths to explain the role of the conductor. So give me this again about the...
Well, I'm not a concert master myself, so I can only tell you what I understand from observed concert master, because I can tell you more what it's like to be a soloist or a chamber musician. But I'll do my best. The concert master is a person who, before the orchestra meets, has already done, shall we say, homework. He's put in the bowings that allows all of the string sections, so that's the violins, violas, cellos, and double bass, to have a sense of continuity of stroke, so that everybody's kind of moving their bows in the same direction. The concert master is also the one who might play the solo voices, where in the piece there might be a famous violin solo. So there's two I can think of right now. One of them is from Rimsky-Korsakov, the Scheherazade. The other one is from an opera by Janacek called Yenufa. There, the concert master is very exposed in playing passages that break free from having all of the section performing together, and then suddenly they're on their own. That's actually extremely difficult to switch, because you're going from the mentality of being one of the group to being a soloist, basically. He's also considered the leader of the orchestra, and that is to say that he is like the ambassador of the entire group, of all the instrumentalists together. And in many cases, that person will not be under contract for 100%, in other words, working 5 days a week or whatever it is, but only half. And there may be two concert masters to every orchestra. And that has got something to do with the fact that there is quite a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. If you're having to look at all the pieces that come in, and under the understanding that there's new pieces coming in all the time, every week there's new repertoire, there's a lot of homework to be doing. Moreover, the conductor and concertmaster can often have a closer working relationship than the conductor might have with other orchestra members. And it's important that the concertmaster and the conductor understand each other, because if, and this is the worst case scenario, the conductor and the orchestra don't get on, then the conductor has to rely on someone to whom they can talk to try and figure out any little issues that might have been occurring within the orchestra. I'm sure there are a myriad of other things that concertmasters do that I'm not particularly aware of.
Yeah, so would the concertmaster be more ever-present and the glue that would understand that orchestra better? So if the conductor rocks in, well, they're who you talk to. They're the ones who hold everything together or maybe accelerate the experience of everything being perfect.
I mean, what you could also consider is that a conductor, no matter how amazing they are, cannot conduct 80 people at the same time individually. So a conductor, if he's great, is not going to give an entry to every section that's coming in every time they come in. You're not marking every entrance. You're assuming that your colleagues are as professional and adult as you and know exactly when to play, even after a 5-bar rest. Now, maybe if they've had a 24-bar rest, they might appreciate an entry if they're feeling not self-confident. But in general, the idea of a conductor is not to and cannot possibly be God hearing 80 separate prayers all at the same time, if you know what I mean. And because of that very fact, the concertmaster will be looked to lead their section, potentially even the general string instrumental section, in certain passages, to be the person that the quartet, that is the first violinist, the leader of the second violins, the leader of the violas, and the leader of the cello, look to for indication of where is this piece going, what is the agogic of this piece, where's the direction of this piece going. So there's a lot more responsibility, and there's no sort of concertmaster's job is not for the retiring wallflower amongst us. And we have those as musicians. There's plenty of retiring wallflowers who are just there, who love the music, who do not have the ambition of being the loudmouth sort of, whatever cliche we have in our heads of concertmasters or of leaders in general. It takes a certain personality, a certain confidence. And if a concertmaster is good, in my opinion, it takes a sort of understanding of the psyche of people and empathy to understand people, the willingness to be open to 80 different opinions day in, day out, in very close proximity, coupled with the idea of interpretation. How are we supposed to play this piece, which lends a certain subjectivity to the whole thing, which makes it quite difficult. But to go back to your answer, because of my father being, your question, I should say, because of my father being a concertmaster during a time when you might say it was a golden age of music making, or a golden age of, certainly of violin playing, we had some of the biggest names in music at that time come to our house for dinner. There's pictures of me with all kinds of stars, like Ita Handel, very famous female violinist who had a huge career, or Herbert Blomstedt, who's still alive, a wonderful conductor, or Menuhin. I know that Menuhin conducted that orchestra a number of times. Oistrakh, David Oistrakh, who's one of the biggest icons in violin playing, passed away during a project that he was doing with the orchestra that my father tended to. My father was one of the first people to be informed of the situation and was one of the first people to be involved in the organization of a commemoration for David Oistrakh, who passed away in Amsterdam. So I've always had close contact to really iconic figures in classical music: Radu Lupu, Yefim Bronfman, David Zinman. Like there's loads of them actually when I start to think about it. And to me, they were normal. There's pictures of me sitting on people's laps or sitting beside them at dinner, or just a picture of me sitting on Uwe Handel's lap, which is, if I think about it, it's like, and because of my mom's Hungarian roots and because of the very strong Hungarian legacy of music making, particularly classical music, they have a really rich heritage. There were a lot of very well-known Hungarian musicians who came to the house as well. And so I grew up in midst this sort of very energetic, very musical background.
Did you appreciate it?
To me, they were all just people. As I say, if I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you, thinking of that photo of me on her lap, on Ida Hamda's lap, and I'm going, just even saying that sounds incredible. There it is. But I haven't thought about it in the meantime. But yeah, I'm not easily starstruck, potentially because of that experience. On the other hand, I admire so many people, so many musicians, and it gives me great pleasure to be in a room with people I greatly admire. It gives me even more pleasure to work with people I greatly admire. I feel like there's no bigger learning curve I can make than to be around people who I really appreciate.
And your first instrument?
My first instrument is the piano. But it's a bit like, what's your mother tongue? Because I grew up with two languages, and I grew up with a lot of piano because my grandmother was a pianist, but I actually left the piano behind quite early.
How
Once the
come?
violin came in, the piano was always very much a kind of a functional instrument used to understand scores, and I didn't have the ambition to play piano very well.
So you moved over to the violin then. I think that was at the age of 5, was it? Was it piano at 3? A violin for your 5th birthday, I believe.
Yes, that was my mom's idea.
Maybe I could say you started learning at 3, or maybe you started learning at 5. But in truth, were you learning a long time before that, just because you're surrounded by it and soaking it up and listening to the conversations, hearing the music, listening to the sounds, figuring out yourself what sounded good or what sounded not so good?
It's easy to say I grew up in it, so to me it's always been the most common communication. But it's now only with my own son and observing him from the moment of his birth to where he is now. He's 4 now. And seeing how he's growing up with music all the time. He has a mother who was still going on stage like a month before I gave birth to him. And I went back to playing very quickly after. And everything about my working life circles back to music. And I don't know. I know that, for example, there's a lot of problems actually of me trying to practice and how he feels about that as a 4-year-old. But I have observed that singing is actually his first language. I know that all children learn language through song and modulation of the voice, but it's something that he has continued to do a lot. And it's just really normal for us to sing. We sing everywhere. We sing going doing grocery shopping. We sing. And it's not me singing. It's not like I'm going around, look, I'm the model classical musician singing to her son. Absolutely not. I don't need to sing. I can be perfectly silent for great stretches of time when I'm not on your podcast. No,
You're allowed to sing if you want, Gwendolyn. I won't stop.
Here we go. No, it's him. He's the one singing and making me sing and me enjoying singing because of him singing all the time. He sings everything.
So the Gwendolyn sitting in school, and for whatever reason, the teacher has lost your attention. Where does your head go?
Ah, Jesus. How old is this Gwendolyn?
Yeah, you're in primary school, 8 or 9, with dreams like the rest of us.
All right. Oh, Jesus. Actually, 8 or 9, I was very alert in school because that's a time when I was constantly changing school and language and learning language. 8 or 9 would have been like 9, 10 is the first time I got in contact with Gaelic, also with Irish language. So I would have been very alert and potentially overwhelmed trying to remember people's names. And then probably I would have gotten bored after a while. Where does my head go? To be honest, I don't remember. I'm not sure I did a lot of daydreaming actually as a child. I think I do more sort of visualization now than I did then. I was probably observing people or watching the detail on movement of other people.
And when the school bell went at the end of a school day, what are you rushing to do?
Oh, nothing. Absolutely not rushing anywhere. I had 7 kilometers to go home with my bicycle, and I would dawdle all the way home. I would find friends to walk home with instead of cycling. I cycled into school and I walked home. That's what I did. I loved the banter. I loved the conversation. And we'd literally be a group of people. And as we went from one part of Dublin to the next, we'd sort of be losing people along the way. And then I'd go home. I'd be home. And my mum would be like, you're late, which, yeah. And then the next thing would be to go and practice.
So your mum, I know she's a teacher. She started the Young European String School of Music, Maria Kellerman. Was she your mum? Was she your teacher? Did she teach you? Did it feel like she was teaching you? Or was she just showing you something that you might have an interest in? Or was it like, oh no, mum is in teacher mode now?
No, my mum's never been a teacher in that sense. She's not, no, she's opinionated and has very strong views and a lot of experience. But my mom is a good teacher and she stopped trying to teach me and let other people do that very early on because I think she must have been aware that trying to teach your own child the exact same thing you do is one of the hardest things you can try.
What a disaster even attempting to do that, I imagine, for the relationship, if nothing else.
Sure. I mean, in the end, you see it a lot as well in artistic families. That sure, you see it everywhere. That people go into the same line of work as their parents have, or into, like, particularly you see with doctors and psychologists. I know families of doctors who've been doctors for generations, but I think that in the end, you might end up doing what your parents do or mimicking it. But it is hard to accept advice, particularly when you're a child.
Yeah. Am I right in saying when you were 6, you played in a big concert, like 1 year on from learning violin?
Yeah.
Is that even possible? It obviously is. How is that possible? And tell me what the situation was, or the venue, and what you had to play.
I played in the large hall of the Listferens, then I moved to the Listferens Music Academy, which is a beautiful building in the middle of Budapest, in the middle of Pest, to be honest. And it's a very famous hall. It's a large hall, a beautiful acoustic. And I performed there as part of a showcase. I played a piece for piano, violin concerto with a reduced piano score. That was the first of many concerts I gave already as a child, either as part of a showcase or as part of music schools concerts, or later on by the age of 8, I was giving my own half concerts or my own full concerts.
This isn't the school play that we all go to see our little kids in, and they're all struggling to sing some song and play an instrument badly. This is a different ball game.
Well, no, yeah, because people are purchasing tickets, and then of course there comes a responsibility with that. You know, these are people who've chosen to spend 1 or 2 hours of their lives with you while you play for them in a hall, and that's always stayed with me. I've never seen the audience as some nameless, faceless thing. It's been a very, very prominent in my mind. I've always appreciated everybody, like certainly from an emotional sense. I've appreciated the fact that people are taking time to sit down with me and have a form of conversation, an active communication together. That's always amazed me. I've always loved playing on stage. It's always been somewhere between loving it and being in awe of it, with a very huge respect for the stage. But yeah, no, this wasn't the school play. I did the school play as well, though. But then I tried to act. I was terrible at it.
But you were clearly gifted to an extraordinary level that most kids wouldn't even touch. Were you aware of that? Did you have a sense of that yourself?
No, I only started realizing that I can do stuff when I was 8. So the first 3 years was more like, okay, I'm doing this. And I remember thinking, am I doing it all right? And sort of searching the faces of the audience members, which is something I would never recommend a person does. Looking for confirmation and affirmation in someone else. But of course, I was 5, 6 years old. What did I know? No, I started to realize that there was a symbiosis between my ability to express emotions through sound and the enjoyment of sharing emotions with other people, and the enjoyment of taking in other people's presence as I played, trying to embrace the fact that they were there rather than being scared of it. And of course, there's a joy of knowing that when you're really concentrated, you're really focused and aware of a piece, you're really in that flow, that you can take other people along with you, even if they don't understand the music the way you do or are new to music. It's that journey that you go on together, that sort of shared sense of excitement that is so important to me. And that's something that I remember consciously feeling around the age of 8.
I've watched the videos of you playing, which I was able to get very easily from your website and onto YouTube and everything else. And watching you playing, where do you disappear to? Like, have you totally disappeared when you're in those pieces?
I'm interested in the use of the word disappear. That's interesting. It's really interesting because the credo is actually that if you're a classical musician who's interpreting a piece from a composer, you are creative, but you're also recreative. You're trying to create a new sense of wonder around a piece that exists. And unless you're improvising it, there's limited amount that you can do to add in something of yourself. So in a way, you kind of disappear because you're representing somebody else's music, right? But at the same time, that music lives through you and is only being actualized through the movement that you're making to make your instrument sound. So I don't think I disappear. What I need instead is I build a certain amount of protection around myself in order to be able to expose very deep inner part of my way of being and share that with people. And that is not disappearing. That's very much being present and also being, wherever possible, as little driven by ego as possible. And that's that flow situation for me. And that only comes with great skill, because if you're having to worry about your skill, then there's ego and there's no flow.
Was it always clear this was going to be your career?
Oh, God, no. No. I remember in leaving cert years still sort of toying with the idea of doing other things entirely.
Like what?
Oh, I loved psychology. I thought I loved it. Of course, probably if I studied it, I'd be like, God, I cannot do all this rote learning. Psychology was interesting to me. Fashion was interesting to me. Design in general was interesting for me. Acting was always this mystery. Theatre, the stage. So I think the way people think and aesthetics and presentation have always been important to me. And essentially, those are things I can learn about or explore as a musician. And when I received a scholarship to study abroad, it was kind of clear. And to be honest, part of the reason I toyed with the idea of doing other things is because not doing other things, but doing classical music would eventually mean leaving the island, leaving home yet again, leaving roots. And that probably was, well, it still isn't easy.
Could you describe your life? Because I'm observing you, studying your material, I'd say you're not a passive musician. You're very, very proactive. I would say you're obviously very creative, but you're entrepreneurial as well, because I think you take a lot of responsibility for your projects and the gigs. That you are an entrepreneur. You come up with new products all of the time. And as opposed to just waiting for the phone to ring and can you come and play a concert for us? Can you explain your life and how you're geared and where does all that come from?
It comes from energy, boundless energy. And that probably is partially inherited, although every sign is going to tell me, you don't inherit energy. But no, I do have a feeling like a lot of that drive is inherited from my family. We see it consistently throughout, particularly my mother's side of the family. We consistently see people who are driven, who survive things, who live through things, who make plans that exceed the boundaries and limitations of the lives they're living in and do stuff. Give you an example, my grandmother had the only functioning private school on the Pest side of Budapest during communism, where everything that wasn't governmentally organized was simply not happening. Very simple. And yet she managed to keep that school running full of students and make a good life for herself. And I don't even think she was under the radar because people knew her. And that doesn't happen unless you have a very certain kind of confidence in your own vision. It's not even about self-belief. It's more about being enthralled by an idea and finding it gripping and interesting and necessary. So I think that's that drive. I need that. I notice that when I'm tired, I can't bring that verve to the work. My life looks like, well, I work more or less 7 days a week, but my work doesn't really seem like work to me. The work part is not the entrepreneurial part, but it's the making the entrepreneurial part happen. So it's either guiding people on a team to come to a collective idea and vision, or it's trying to materialize these ideas. And trying to materialize them means getting them out of my head into paper or into a 3D object. So if I'm explaining it to somebody, other people can grasp it quickly. Sometimes that's really important because if your idea is no good, you're not going to find the funding to get the idea off the ground.
That's business, isn't it?
Well, that is the essence. But as a musician, you don't grow up knowing. As a musician, you grow up knowing that you need to practice a lot and you have to be the best, whatever that means. At least in as a soloist, or perhaps if you don't want to or have that ambition, then you go up knowing you still need to be pretty on point to get a job. And also because you need a certain level of skills to be able to function well in a group, be it in an orchestra or in an ensemble. I mean, you need to be on top of your skills. At some point, I think the realization hit me that if I want to live the life that I do, I need to work very hard because I need to maintain my health. I need to be an athlete. You need to be able to bound up those stairs onto the stage and go for it. What I find difficult in my everyday life is just managing all of the different ideas that I have that might sometimes happen all at the same time. So today, for example, other than the privilege of talking with you, Greg.
Thank you.
Of course, I've been at meetings about my Gaia Music Festival that takes place in May. I've had meetings about projects that I'm doing with chamber orchestra. I've had a meeting with an agent I work with. I've taught 3 students. I've gone to the gym. I did my yoga practice early this morning before my son got up. I also was a mother. I spent some of the morning with my son before bringing him off to creche. I've practiced and I've decided to learn some more skills within my performance life or to deepen skills to do with conducting and playing the viola, which is my mom's instrument. So now I'm having to split the time reserved for playing the violin to other instruments as well. And then at some point, all of that, the glamour of learning, because sometimes there's a glamour to learning stuff, isn't it? It's so wonderful to still have this opportunity to learn stuff, to know that you know absolutely nothing about something and that you're about to learn something about it, which is thrilling, which is why I think you do your podcast, probably.
Yeah.
So interesting to get to know people. At some point, then I'm just going to have to cook dinner, get the dinner on the table.
I'm hungry, Mum.
Exactly. And that's actually been one of the finest learning curves I've had in recent years. The wake-up call happens for many musicians when they realize that the phone's not going to ring unless they do something about it. For many of them, that happens either during their studies or after. For those who have the privilege of performing for concert halls, at an early age, they know very quickly this is business. If you want to make your life from this, you're going to have to work very, very hard because classical music is ultra niche. And anyone arguing, but it's something out there for. I'm the first to argue that access to the arts needs to be made that accessible that nobody has an excuse not to go and visit something to do with the arts or not to be in touch with the arts today, every day. It's just mental, emotional hygiene. It's the way that humans express themselves since the beginning of time. It doesn't matter which form of art, but immerse yourself in it, But for me, the biggest wake-up call was having a child and realizing I'm going to have to get up at 6. I'm going to be looking after him. And in 14 hours' time, I'm going to be performing again in front of 500 people. And nobody cares whether I was changing his diapers this morning. They don't care. They're there for the music. And that has taught me so much.
I think for anyone who wants to know more about you, a visit to your website is illuminating. There's so much I wanted to talk to you about. I know you're so observant. I know when you were learning yourself, the name Herman Krebers came up. I'm probably pronouncing that all wrong, but you were observing. There's something you do, Gwendolyn, when you participate in something, it wasn't a case of, okay, you're giving me lessons. I'm going to learn from this process because you were as interested in the process as learning the skill, I think, which I think led to Michaela's Music House, which is so, so clever. So you're a writer as well, and you want to pass your magic and what you've learned onto others. During COVID, I know there was the Exhale program. So again, the entrepreneur managed to keep yourself going with 90 other participants. And I think
I led a group of 90 professionals who all found themselves in the same problem, which was that many of them were not furloughed because they were freelancers. And many of them were itching to not just to earn a living, but to actually get out there and continue what it is they've learned. So the Exhale, which is an in-person retreat, which I've created to offer a holistic approach to well-being as a musician or as an artist, which is something that is deeply overlooked in the classical music sector and often actually ridiculed. just even well-being. I already see loads of classical musicians sort of rolling their eyes, oh, this new agey stuff. But when I talk about well-being, I'm talking about not being injured. I'm talking about having the energy to do your job. I'm talking about longevity on stage. I'm talking about clarity of mind and a deep sense of satisfaction and joy about the work, which is incredibly overlooked because we're so busy being super skilled. Anyway, I wanted to do the Exhale in person in Easter 2020. And the people who I had approached to lead it with me sort of egged me on to try and bring it online. And we found ourselves with 90 professionals from all around the world, providing tuition and classes and concerts for around 2,000 participants from around the world. It was a really necessary community at the time, because I think musicians and artists in general felt very lost during the pandemic.
And from an office worker point of view, a professional that doesn't have to leave the computer a whole pile. The big change for us from all of that time was working from home. It's transformed everything that we do, makes it so efficient and effective and productive and all of that kind of good stuff. Obviously, you need to keep in touch with your colleagues and be deliberate around all of that. That was the legacy of that time for me. What was it for you and all of your tribe?
Perhaps the entrepreneurial part of me discovered something that is apparent in a lot of musicians' minds, but may have not been formulated. And that is that, and I speak here now only for classical musicians, because that's something I think I know something about. But I can imagine that it holds true for a lot of artists. And I know it holds true for people working in the hotel business, the restaurant business, catering. We had no, and we have no lobby. We've no lobby. We've got, even when people talk about unions for musicians, that has to do with people who are engaged by official institutions such as orchestras or people, teachers, lecturers working in university. If they're engaged in this way to provide music, then that's fine. But a huge amount of musicians in the world are freelancers. They've taken that risk. They've chosen to have less financial solidity and therefore have greater freedom in choosing which projects they decide to do or not. And with that comes a certain sense of responsibility. But there also is a certain sense of disorganization. It's very hard to put together a group of freelance musicians, and we felt it during the pandemic. Some countries were great about looking after their own kind, and others were not. A lot of companies that specialize in live events went bankrupt very quickly. A number of renowned international agencies for artists went bankrupt and were liquidated very early on already in the pandemic. And what was interesting to note is that in some cases, the higher the profile, the more well-known the musician, the greater the amount of concerts, the greater the financial loss in those 2 years, because many were not reimbursed for the concerts that kept being pushed on and pushed on and pushed on, and in many cases were cancelled. So the pandemic for a lot of musicians is actually still felt. It wasn't until 2020, the autumn of 2023, and we knew this back in 2021, that people would be able to rent spaces in which to make music because they were literally clogged up with all of the stuff that didn't take place for however long a country was in lockdown. And that was also different. And as an international musician, I was dealing with completely different protocols. Ireland was very strict. Holland tried to be strict. France, Paris, for example, was incredibly strict for a while. Switzerland was found to be strict by the Swiss, but was actually very lenient if you compared it to other countries. So I think a lot of us felt that the pandemic created a disruption in the lives of many people. And when the pandemic was over, for all the people who had their health to show for it, thankfully, they kind of went on with their lives. And for people in arts, you can still feel that there was a pandemic. And interestingly, there's a lot of things that other sectors have learned from it, as you say, the benefits of working from home, the beauty of being able to hold online meetings, there's a lot of classical musicians who are only too glad to see the back of it, who are so thankful to be meeting people in person again, sharing knowledge in person again. And I see the good in that, and I see the bad. I see that musicians and music tends to move back into ultra-conservative spaces really quickly, rather than embracing the advantages that we could have of technology.
Anything good at all from that time?
Oh, God, loads. I was supposed to go on a really big tour around 3 months after my son's birth. I'm looking back, I'm so thankful I didn't do it, and that I got to stay at home with my son and not have to consider how I would feel physically. And that process then led me to think about how artists with families make lives in our business, and where it is that they would need more support, more, where they would need to be seen more, how little, in a way, society does for families, and how much is expected of individuals and of parents, and of how impossible it is. And it's not just for solo violinists, it's for everyone. And that isn't a talking point, and it should be. And the reason it's not a talking point is because it's not of any benefit to anyone. I mean, we're still running around based on the Industrial Revolution. We're still living our lives according to stuff that worked 100 years ago, but doesn't work anymore. And I hope the classical music sector embraces the understanding that the stuff that didn't work and doesn't work anymore, it's not scary if we consider changing it. The act of transforming something and of thinking about a problem doesn't have to be scary. It can be really exciting.
On the subject of creativity, Gwendolyn's Bridge Club, I take it that isn't about playing cards.
No. No, that stemmed from an idea I had before the pandemic, and that was very helpful during the pandemic. It's an arts club that is designed to provide different forms of art to a wider public than might otherwise be in touch with the arts. I try to appeal to people who might be up for a night out or for an afternoon out, but mightn't be attracted by Don Giovanni poster or a Beethoven by Lincoln poster, but might find it attractive to see that there's something that could engage their 5-year-old, or there's something that could, engage their palate, or there is something that might entice them to, look for communication and conversation with other people they don't know. So I've created salon evenings and afternoons, small events for people who are members of the club. And being a member is at a very low cost. And so I'm also trying to rethink how we price events for classical music, whether how much threshold do we create by hiking up our prices? Can we survive without doing so? Or can we not? I mean, it's a place where we can ask questions, where artists are involved and audience members are very, very closely connected, to also describe these questions and to see, can we find answers? Because we know what the problems are, but can we find answers if we have a philosophical discourse about it together?
And if I'm correct, The Journey is your current project?
The Journey is a project with which I'm on tour currently. It's a theatre production, a music theatre production that I've conceived and developed with a Swiss writer called Lucas Beatrice. And we started or reinvented, shall we say, during lockdown, and follows a historical and fictional narrative from the Ukraine right down to Budapest. And at the time when we started the work, we had no idea what the world would look like 3 years later, because we began in 2020. And so the project itself and all the themes that we discuss are really current, which has made it a very interesting project to be part of, and also a little bit scary. Yeah, and so we're still on tour with that. And I love it because it allows me to get closer to storytelling, not only through words, but also through music, or not only through music, but also with words.
I always say it takes two things to make something happen. Mm-hmm. Someone to ask the question, how about? And someone else then to say, oh, why not? And I think in your case, you asked the question, how about more than once? and you jump into the why not space as well. And but you know how to make things work. So obviously a super talented musician, a very, very creative person, and an entrepreneur. Which one do you think you are more than anything?
I think I'm a musician. I think I'm a musician who isn't afraid to look for other options. I think by nature of what I do, I'm involved in a business that is quite slow moving, quite conservative, and does itself a disservice to a certain extent by not fully embracing its own audience. And when classical music is accused of being elitist or snobby, I've spent years going, no, that's not true. And the more that I evolve and the closer I get to conversations with people who are not in the arts sector or who are not in the music business at all, the more I realize that sometimes it is true. And it would be of great service to classical music if we could remember that we have not only a commitment to the composer or to the art form and to ourselves, but we also have a commitment to remember what the purpose is of music.
I think in a context when everything is immediate, attention spans have totally fallen apart. Trying to get someone to take the time to dig a little bit deep and to appreciate something are totally gone. I think it was Taylor Swift making a big deal about the fact that you can now buy an album. Ooh, a whole collection of songs that are constructed to have a little bit of a story, and they go from, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the other side we have another set of songs, and they all weave together to tell a bigger story. People don't get it anymore. So I can imagine when there's something like classical music, which is a deeper dive and it isn't as accessible as everything else for people, that job is so much more difficult. And I can just imagine the workload that would be required to bring people a little bit closer to it. You're on the Win Happy podcast. What's happiness to you?
There's so many ways of approaching this. There's the deep and profound and the flippant and the funny. And oh my God, happiness to me is still not being tired at 10 p.m. at night when my son is finally asleep and I can get some work done. No, I can't. There's so much happiness to be found. I'm not even in search of it. It's not something I find myself asking my son either. I find myself having to catch myself because I get caught in these sort of traps of asking my son the same questions. Is this fun? Are you having fun? Do you like this? And all these things, which makes him think that I expect him to say that it's fun because that'll please me, because then I'll feel that I've done a good job as a mother. So I'm not sure that I can answer your question honestly, because there's so many things that make me so happy. Before easy to answer what doesn't make me happy, but happiness, geez, it's just there for the reaching out to. It's a mindset to a certain extent as well.
In truth, Gwendolyn, I ask all of my guests that question. And if you were to ask me, I'd struggle to answer it as well. And for me, putting the two parts together is if you can live a happy life, but if you can win at the same time. What does winning look like for you? What do you want to achieve?
I would love if the work I've done is meaningful, and not just now, and certainly not just to me, but that it remains meaningful. So that the joy that I have talking about my family and the importance I believe my family members, so individual people in my family, the imprint that I have left on other people's lives continues to resound long after I'm here. And I'm really genuine about that. It hasn't got to do with, it's not about megalomania. It's about having lived a life that has harnessed and seen the privilege it is to be alive, safe, fed, warm, and more or less at peace with oneself and others. And how amazing that is, and how to just use that time and do great stuff with it.
They were big, big questions. So I've got one whopper for you. What was your best day ever?
Please tell me that all of the people who talk to you just really struggle with this. Or turn it around and go, well, what about you, Greg?
Well, one poor man said it was the day he started this particular job in a place he was working. And like, okay, please don't give me the politically correct answer. Every listener will go, oh no, shut up. And of course, everyone goes for the day my child was born or the day I got married. And okay, that's cool. But I've some beauties. I get absolute beauties. One lady recalled a day swimming with her dad. And she remembers that day so clearly, just floating in the water. One day he took her swimming, and I think her dad wasn't around anymore. And when I asked her, that was the first thing that she came up with. She'd never thought about that before in that way, except when I asked her that question. So it's a huge one. I think a lot of the time about perfect moments. And they come along, and sometimes you look back, oh, that was a pretty good day. The very, very odd time you realize when you're in the middle of it, this is just a perfect moment or a perfect day, or yeah. So with all that said, I'll throw the ball back to you.
I really find it hard to answer. There have been so many good things in my life. I've struggled with repetitive strain injury and other injuries from the job that I do and from how I was able to perform that job or not in my years. And so for me, to be honest, when you've gone through loss or through pain or you've dealt with pain on a daily basis for a long time, every day when you wake up where pain isn't a driving factor, the negation of that is a really good day. The negation of pain, and pain can be physical or it can be mental struggle, it can be stress, it can be sadness. Every day that isn't something that you're having to battle, first of all, before you get anything done, is just incredible. But I think that much like everything else, we don't know to appreciate that until we've gone the other end. I think in the end, happiness comes out of having lived through great sadness and therefore recognizing happiness within this.
Wow, I wasn't expecting to hear a conversation about pain. I presume that's part and parcel of what you do from all of that playing, is it?
Well, if you're a violinist, you're constantly making the same movements, and some instruments are more pliant and more forgiving for the body and allow the body greater movement range. But it's the same, like see violin playing as tennis and then admire, whichever tennis player who's had a long career and very little injury. And then when you're over admiring them, consider how much work has happened that you haven't seen, where they've been in the gym doing the opposite movement of what they've been doing all day in order to carry their body through that relentless activity that they go through day in, day out. And it's the same for violinists. That's what I was referring to earlier, the idea of well-being. Violinists, viola players, cellists, pianists, double bass players, there's a huge amount of physical involvement in playing an instrument well, particularly in playing an instrument for great lengths of time. And if you are not aware of how to move or how your body's designed to move, and if you're not trained in sports psychology or in, how to perform, how to present an idea, if you're just let loose with that, then injury will happen. Somebody recently mentioned that they had an operation bypass, and they described it to me, and I was just horrified, just the very thought of it. I was just, oh my God. And then I asked whether they were being not just given physiotherapy, but whether they were offered psychological support. And the answer was no. And that is a massive mistake. You cannot have a person whose heart has literally been stopped in order for them to go on living, go through an operation, knowing that that's happened, experiencing a body that has happened too, and not find a way to support that person through that experience, and then expect them to live and embrace life with joy and they have to do all that work on their own. That's not fair. That's not how things should work. And so opening up that conversation within my sector that, you need to be not just mentally of a certain focus, but you need to be physically active and well nourished to do what we do for a great length of time without pain is a very necessary conversation.
Gwendolyn, thank you so much. And what I'd like to do is leave the listener with a recording of you playing. So can I ask you to choose something, and maybe you explain to the listener why you've chosen this particular piece?
I don't know who your listeners might be. And so I would suggest two pieces. I would suggest one for those who are very ready and open to listen to classical music, want to listen to a beautiful song, but perhaps don't have much time. And it's by a French composer called Fauré, Gabriel Fauré. And the name of the piece is Après un rêve, which means after a dream. It's originally an aria for voice, and it's been rearranged for violin and piano, and I made a recording of it. It's a beautiful piece. It's full of longing and sadness and joy and heartbreak and love. Very evocative. It's beautiful on its own. It's beautiful if you look up the lyrics, and I love it. And it's something very easy to immerse yourself in. And one of the pieces I'm most happy to have recorded, and 10 years after recording, I still think is a strong interpretation. I stand by. I think it's good. Is of a piece for solo violin by a Belgian composer called Eugène Ysaÿe. It's his third violin solo sonata. It's called Ballade. And I made a recording of it. There's also a video of it available, which I'm very happy with. It's a 7-minute, maybe 9 minute, I think it's 7 minutes of fantasy and incredible music. And if you're open to listening to it, just sitting down and taking that in, it's like a Jeff Buckley album. You heard it the first time, you go, yeah, and then the second time you go, oh my god, and then by the third time of listening to it, like, oh, I'm going to listen to this again about it. So that piece is really, really great. It's a fantastic composition.
Thank you so much, and I hope the listeners will enjoy them. I'm sure they will. Thank you, Gwendolyn.
Thank you, great for having me. Thanks for your invitation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.